And if we think about what are the biggest causes of divorce in this country, it's usually infidelity or just being on a different page financially. You have to take upbringing into consideration with regards to making financial decisions. You have to make sure that your values align, your goals align, and a lot of the times, if there is a mismatch between your values and goals, well, then it's much harder to save for whatever goal we're working towards from a financial perspective. So you need to make sure it's all in alignment.
How do you help lawyers who might want to make an early exit or step away from golden handcuffs?
It's a big decision, obviously, and there's lots of reasons why people do it. From my end, what we try to do is help them see the financial consequences of doing so. We all kind of know that person that wanted to retire early, but they're like, oh, I still have a kid in college, so I'm going to stick around a little bit longer. The reality is they don't always have to, but they don't realize that they don't have to. So especially when you're working with big law attorneys, they make, in many cases, way more income than they actually need. So what ends up happening? We've literally come across situations where people just stockpile, I'm not exaggerating, millions of dollars in cash because they didn't need the money. They earned it, but they didn't need the money. With women lawyers, more so than men, I'm not saying it doesn't happen with men, but it's almost the opposite scenario where there's guilt about spending, but they're not spending on themselves. The guilt comes from hiring a nanny. The guilt comes from hiring a housekeeper. That's where the guilt comes in on the spending because they just feel like they're not necessarily doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's keeping them up at night a little bit. But at the same time, I can make the argument that it makes them a better mom and makes them a better parent in general, just to know that when they're coming home, they're not worried about doing the dishes or cleaning up. They're spending time with their kids. They're being more present. Your time is very short as it is. And to come home and spend you spend that time doing chores and errands. It's not the best use of your time, especially the further you go in your career.
Hello and welcome back to the Will podcast. I'm so happy to be here with Niraj Chhabra. He's the founder of Sidebar Advisors, which is a boutique financial planning firm which exclusively serves lawyers who are navigating complex compensation structures, demanding careers, and building long-term wealth strategies. And the firm serves legal professionals from rising associates to equity shareholders with a mission of personal behavior-based guidance. And I'm curious about that. We're going to talk about that. That supplies to helps people have both professional and personal clarity for what they want to do with their money. He also is the host of the Sidebar Advisors podcast, where he highlights diverse journeys within the legal field and explores what's ahead for the profession. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. Niraj regularly leads seminars at law firms. He's a keynote speaker, and he also has a flagship course on financial planning for women attorneys. And so that, of course, is what I really want us to dive into today, Niraj. So a big welcome to the Will podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, as I shared with you, you're the first man I'm having on the podcast. I do work with male clients, non-binary people, in addition to women, though the focus of Will is obviously on women attorneys. We're very aligned, and we're both here to help women lawyers and lawyers in general figure out what they really want to do with their time, energy, and money, and really the wealth of their life. So, Niraj, take us back a little bit. How did you get into financial advising? And then how did you get into working specifically with attorneys?
The way that I got started was when I was in college. This was during the dot-com era. I remember my mom working really hard. She was a nurse, working a lot of double shifts and things of that nature to provide for both myself and my brother's education. And she was a rock star. She paid off her mortgage in 15 years. At one point, her mortgage was literally double-digit interest rates, and we both graduated without a single penny of student loan debt on a nurse's salary. And I remember thinking that her life could have been a lot easier had she known other strategies. She was an immigrant from India, didn't know anything other than CDs. And at that time, everybody was making money hand over fist. She didn't know what a 529 plan was. She didn't know what a mutual fund was or anything like that. So it was something that piqued my interest. When I was walking to the student center one day, I saw a flyer on how mutual funds work. And it was sponsored by the Financial Management Club. I attended this. Long story short, I became the president of the Financial Management Club, which wasn't as cool of a position as it sounds. And somebody reached out to me and said, listen, your job is, you're right now what you're doing is you're educating the student body on student loan strategies, getting your first home, investing, Roth IRAs. Why not make it a career? I didn't even know financial planning was a thing at that point. It just made a lot of sense. It was something I'm comfortable with. I was never good at sales or anything like that was of interest to me, but talking about things that are important to me or interesting to me, that just came naturally, and rest is history. So that's kind of how I got into financial planning as a whole. Answering your question about working specifically with lawyers, we were fortunate earlier in our careers. I've been practicing for about 20 years, and about 5 years in, somebody just kind of planted the seed. It says, you should really come teach CLE for our organization. It was an affinity bar association. And then from there, Elena, did you ever see the movie Inception?
Yes. The Christopher Nolan, where I think Leonardo's in that, right? And the whole world turns and everything.
So for those that have not seen the movie, there was a scene where his wife had this idea in her head that she couldn't get out of her head. She believed it so passionately that it was reality, and it wasn't. And a friend of mine says, you should really figure out how to teach CLEs and how to get accredited. It was one of those inception moments I couldn't get out of my head. Long story short, I became accredited, and it just opened up a lot of doors for us. We were getting into law firms, we were getting into bar associations, teaching courses on long-term care planning and estate planning, and ultimately our flagship course, which was financial empowerment for women in law. So it's been progression over time, but teaching those CLEs ultimately naturally led to a lot of people reaching out to us and asking us to work with them. So that's how we ended up where we are.
I love it. Talk a little bit about this behavior-based work that you do, what that means.
So I'm a behavioral financial advisor, which basically means that numbers are numbers, but if you don't understand the why behind the numbers, oftentimes you're not going to necessarily get somewhere or get where you want to. So good examples could be using my mom. If I were to talk to her and say, hey, I think you should invest in this mutual fund, even now when I manage her portfolio, it's hard for her to step outside of her comfort zone just because of her upbringing. But I think a good relatable story for your audience would probably be, we've all met that couple that met in law school. One of them was fortunate enough to have mom and dad help them out with their law school financing. And the other person went to school at night because they had to work full time during the day. And they took out student loans on their own just to get by. Decided to take a job, maybe in big law, knowing that they're going to stick around just to pay off the loans and then kind of come up with an exit strategy. Now, these two people found each other, as opposites oftentimes do. And now it's time to raise their own family. And they have to make decisions about, hey, we have to start planning for our kids' education, and they want to go to a private law school. And the other person says, well, slow down. I want to retire early. Well, don't you want to give our kid every advantage that they can have? Well, I don't know. I turned out okay. I worked at night and I worked in the day, went to school at night, and it taught me the value of my education. I think I've earned the right to retire early. Yeah, but you of all people should know how far back it set us that you had these hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of student loans. Nope. Who's right and who's wrong in that scenario?
No one's right, no one's wrong. There's just a difference of perspective and opinion and viewpoints.
They have different experiences, but could this potentially lead to a financial disagreement? And if we think about what are the biggest causes of divorce in this country, it's usually infidelity or just being on a different page financially. You have to take upbringing into consideration with regards to making financial decisions. You have to make sure that your values align, your goals align, and a lot of the times, if there is a mismatch between your values and goals, well, then it's much harder to see for whatever goal we're working towards from a financial perspective. So you need to make sure it's all in alignment.
That's the framework. And then how do you do that with people? And how often are you working with couples? And how often are you working with individuals?
And it doesn't matter if you're working with a couple or an individual, you still have to make sure that align. A colleague and I were sharing war stories, and she was telling me about this one client that she had where she was basically talking to him, and he kind of shared this story about how when he was a kid, he worked all summer long to save money to buy nice clothes for school because his parents didn't have money and he was self-conscious. And this summer happens and she goes, Mom, I'm ready to go back to school shopping. Where's that money that I've been giving you all summer to buy clothes? She says, what money? Well, guess what? This led to trust issues for the rest of his life. He always felt like he couldn't spend any money because it's going to go away in a second. Whether you're a single person or a couple, you need to make sure that you're aligned, you're understanding where your money roots come from. And number two, do your values align with that? So it's funny you brought it up because we have this toolkit where we basically have this card exercise.
Yeah, I'm curious. What are those cards?
So they all have different values on them, and you basically have to narrow it down to your top choices. And sometimes we have couples do them separately and then do it together to see where they overlap. And
so it's a card deck of values, and people lay them out on the table and play with them and move them around. Prioritize top 5.
You start off with 20, then 10, then 5, and then you kind of compare and see if there's overlap or disconnects. And a couple examples: friendship, meaningful work, family, freedom, wealth, competition, religion, excellence.
So people literally come into your office and you give a couple individual a pack of cards and they do that exercise.
Yeah. If they come into the office, sometimes we have a virtual version on our website that we could utilize as well. And not every couple wants this, but sometimes when you're noticing that there is some disconnect between people in terms of either taking action on their finances or between spouses, sometimes it's a good exercise to kind of keep in your back pocket and have them go through.
So it really sounds like aligning, like you do financial planning in alignment with their values. And then I imagine with their vision, and their values connect to their vision, what they want the next chapter, or do they want to pay for their kids to go to college? I've got a client right now, she just retired. Her husband wants to get on the sailboat and sail. And she's still caring for her aging mother, but she doesn't really want to get on a sailboat and sail. So I imagine you help people like that come to figure out how to align their money with how they want to live their life.
Correct. So a good example could be somebody says family is one of their top values. And maybe that's the reason why they want that shore house, because it's an opportunity to bring the family together. Well, when we notice they're making decisions or purchases, maybe a car as an example, that are out of alignment, and we have to say, hey, listen, given the payments, it's going to be one or the other. Which one aligns better with your values? Okay, maybe you don't need that car. The shore house might be a better use to kind of bring the family together. So what's kind of how you kind of blend the two together at times.
So let's talk a little bit then about specifically doing financial planning with lawyers. I'm sure you do financial planning with other people too, even though your practice specializes in lawyers. And what unique challenges, and this could be mindset as well as quote unquote reality, because I know perception really influences our experience of reality. So what unique challenges do you see lawyers facing around financial planning?
It starts pretty much straight out of law school. Attorneys typically have significantly more student loan debt than other professionals right out the gate. They're starting their big law career with 6 figures or multiple 6 figures worth of student loan debt, starting to make good money. But what does that mean? Everybody's telling them that they should be putting money into a Roth IRA. Well, guess what? They don't qualify. Everybody's telling them that they should be saving money into their 401k. Well, I want to pay off those student loans. Which one's the right approach? Fast forward a couple of years, there's less likelihood that their children are going to qualify for financial aid. So they have to kind of think about retirement planning and balancing that out against their kids' education. Wealth creep is a real thing where they just start to see what their peers are spending money on and they want to spend money on. Oh, by the way, they're paying an insane amount in taxes because their income is higher than other professionals, even at the tail end of their careers, or not even that. They have to buy into the equity of their firm if they go down that road. They have to much out, and there's tax consequences for those. Phantom income for those that are equity partners and shareholders is a real thing where they're paying tax on income that they didn't earn. A lot of challenges that are unique to attorneys. It doesn't mean that they only exist in the legal world, but they're definitely much more prevalent. Everybody's trying to sell them insurance and they don't know if it's relevant or if they should be buying it or not. Our job is to just help them navigate those unique circumstances and help them weed through the stuff that's not relevant and show them what is.
Let's talk a little bit about wealth creep and spending for lawyers, because this is a place, and then I really want to start drilling into women attorneys. A lot of the women I work with have shared stories of I'll spend $5,000 on a vacation or a getaway because I feel like I deserve it so badly, but then not even really be able to fully enjoy it because I still have to work, or a lot of self-soothing spending on shopping. And then I get the stuff in the mail, I get these boxes, I don't even really want it by the time I get it. And then I have to return it and just not really feeling yucky about the whole thing, the environmental impact. Talk about wealth creep a little bit, and then specifically what you see in women lawyers.
Sure. It's hard to avoid. Everybody around you is super successful and they're driving the fancy cars and they have those vacation homes and they're taking these big elaborate trips, and you start to get self-conscious. It's very hard not to. There's a saying that everybody's trying to keep up with the Joneses, but nobody realizes that the Joneses are broke.
I never heard that part of the story. You don't know what the Joneses credit card bill looks like.
You don't. It's a lot of showing off, and sometimes it's just mental therapy, just to feel like they're not spending all this time in the office for nothing. But plenty of clients that have new clothes with tags on them that they've never worn. And you just have to kind of reassess, is it actually bringing you any type of satisfaction? Personally, I would rather spend money on experiences. And I think that a lot of those folks feel the same way, but in the absence of time, they got to spend their money somewhere. And sometimes it's just an outlet. Doesn't apply to everybody, but we definitely see it more within the legal profession.
All right, let's get into some of the unique challenges you see for women lawyers. You have a subspecialty in them, which is why we're talking today, really.
It's interesting because with women lawyers, more so than men, I'm not saying it doesn't happen with men, but it's almost the opposite scenario where there's guilt about spending, but they're not spending on themselves. The guilt comes from hiring a nanny. The guilt comes from hiring a housekeeper. That's where the guilt comes in on the spending, because they just feel like they're not necessarily doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's keeping them up at night a little bit. But at the same time, I can make the argument that it makes them a better mom and makes them a better parent in general, just to know that when they're coming home, they're not worried about doing the dishes or cleaning up. They're spending time with their kids. They're being more present. Your time is very short as it is. And to come home and spend that time doing chores and errands, it's not the best use of your time, especially the further you go in your career.
I wonder if it's connected back to that values exercise you do with people, with the value of like, it's either a value or a should, which I think sometimes can be connected. Like, I should be able to clean the house, or I should be able to care for my own children. But here I am wanting a career that's meaningful and fulfilling and makes good money. So I wonder if some of the guilt that you're talking about is really underneath it. There are some values conflicts.
There is, and I'll share a personal story that kind of relates to it. Sometimes the guilt is, like you said, I should be able to balance it all out. I know how to fix a sink. I know how to change it. So our faucet was not working, and I told my wife she was going to hire a plumber, and I said, no, I could do this. But it was a decent amount of my Saturday afternoon. The next time something broke, we had to do something in the yard, and I went through the same spiel about how I could do this. And my wife reminded me, like, listen, I know you can do this, but my upbringing was you do it yourself. You know how to do this. You don't spend money. You don't pay people to do things that you could do. Long story short, there was some work that needed to be done in the yard, and she convinced me to hire somebody to do it. And the moment I realized that was the right choice was when my son wanted me to play Legos with him. And I'm literally watching the person doing the work in the yard from my kitchen window and realizing, like, if I was out there, I had to say no to my son.
Exactly. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. One of the exercises I do with people, it's around boundary setting, but really it's also about values and alignment with your time and energy. Is about, we draw a tree, and at the roots of the tree are like, what is it you really want to say yes to? And that's like, I really want to say yes to playing Legos with my son. I really want to say yes. A lot of the women I work with want to leave their big firms, want to maybe leave the practice. Many of them stay in the law in just like a different way if they leave a big firm. How do you help lawyers who might want to make an early exit or step away from golden handcuffs?
It's a big decision, obviously, and there's lots of reasons why people do it. From my end, what we try to do is help them see the financial consequences of doing so. We all kind of know that person that wanted to retire early, but they're like, oh, I still have a kid in college, so I'm going to stick around a little bit longer. The reality is they don't always have to, but they don't realize that they don't have to. So especially when you're working with big law attorneys, they make, in many cases, way more income than they actually need. So what ends up happening? We've literally come across situations where people just stockpile, I'm not exaggerating, millions of dollars in cash because they didn't need the money. They earned it, but they didn't need the money. They end up not having time to invest it, so it just sits in cash. And it's there. So sometimes people are working because they think that they need to pay for this out of pocket, but they've done the savings already and it may not be necessary. Or they think their lifestyle, especially if they're on the scale, they continue to get these substantial raises year over year. Well, guess what? They're still living the same lifestyle they were a couple of years ago. And this is extra money. They're still putting money towards their kids' education. They're still taking care of their parents. They're still putting money towards retirement, and their life is set and established. Even if they took a six-figure or multiple six-figure haircut, their life wouldn't change at all, but they don't realize.
Obviously, I don't do financial planning with my clients. We do talk about money. We talk about money mindset. And through one of those conversations, one of my clients who had just made partner at a firm, and she was having a lot of inner turmoil about, I just made partner. Do I give this up now? But she was also so unhappy. She really wanted out. And she realized, you know what? I could live on a third of what I'm making.
Exactly.
And she had 2 little kids, and she got a great new job that was connected to her legal experience. She doesn't have the billable hours. She doesn't have the stress of being a partner and building a book. And she's like, I can live on a third. Yeah, she's happier. So tell us how you specifically work with women attorneys and what's in your financial empowerment course for women in law.
I don't think I realized it until years later, but a big catalyst or motivator behind the course and me doing it was my mother. It just seems obvious to you, but it wasn't obvious to me earlier in my career.
But I'm glad you had that insight. That's beautiful.
I don't even know if I realized it on my own or somebody else pointed it out to me, but I got there. That being said, a lot of it is there are differences in financial planning between men and women, and some of it may seem obvious. So, for example, if I were to ask you, hey, what do you think is the biggest difference in finances between men and women? What do you think your first answer would be?
I think it's this social conditioning that women don't think that they're good with money. And that might be my own story and projection that I'm putting onto this, because that was the narrative in my family, was that men are good with money and women, don't worry your pretty little heads. You're going to have some man take care of you.
I mean, a lot of that was societally enforced. I mean, it wasn't that long ago before women could even open up a bank account.
Right. Or have their own credit card. It was like, what, 1973?
That's not a long time ago. So some of it, that does exist. Some of it is things like pay disparity. That's unfortunately still a very big issue, less so in the field of law, mainly because of there's women's initiatives at the firms and there's pay transparency at these firms. It exists in
some firms. There's still a lot of black box around comp in firms. I mean, that's what I hear.
But it's to a lesser degree at some of these firms that some of your clients are working at. Now, some of it's less obvious. Everybody knows that women historically live longer than men. The research showed 5 years. Now it's more like 7 years. You could have a situation, especially the baby booming generation, where husbands were already older than their spouses, 10 years. You couple that with longevity differences. A woman could be a widow for 10, 15, 17 years living off of one income, one social security potentially. When the husband in that scenario gets older and frail and needs care, who's there to support him? The wife. He passes away. Who's there to take care of her? That becomes an issue. The biggest true differences, I would say, is women just wear more hats, unfortunately. One of the things that I always like to ask is when we're doing this course that you're referencing, how many women here are the primary breadwinner, but are still the ones that pack their kids' lunches in the morning?
I bet about half the hands go up. I would say that's a big financial concern for the women who come to Will and work with Will, is that they are the financial bread earner. They're really scared to let go of the salary in terms of their family. Yeah.
It's not just women with kids either. It's caregivers, and women attorney caregivers get a double whammy because 75% of caregiving responsibilities fall on women's shoulders, not men.
That number seems low. 75% seems low. My vantage point, but mostly talking to women. So that's my vantage point is skewed also. So many of the women I work with are sandwich generation or raising kids and taking care of aging parents. Yeah.
They get the double whammy because let's assume we have 2 siblings, brother and a sister. Mom needs care. We know that she's now a widow, unfortunately. The expectation is, well, Elena's a attorney. She can afford to take care of mom. On top of everything else, there's just that expectations. It's hard. It's very hard to do all that balancing. And you mentioned about women, the perception is that women may not have the financial literacy compared to men. It's interesting you brought it up because when I first started my career, the company I worked for did a lot of research on this topic. What they found was that women tended to be more conservative investors. And this is how we were trained. So positioning solutions for a client show women more conservative investments for that reason. And while this was true, it wasn't the complete picture. They dumped more money into the research. And what they found is that women were comfortable taking on the same level of risk as men. They just wanted more information first. They wanted your homework or more shoot from the hip. Well, here's the challenge. When you're putting your kids' lunches together and trying to keep track of their activities and what size shoes they're going to need and taking care of mom and getting dinner on the table, when do you have the time to do this research? You don't. And then what ends up happening is you could have two people in the identical position, identical salary, contributing the same amount of money into their 401k, but one invested more conservatively than the other. And then over time, there's this delta between their 401k balances. So we end up with a smaller amount of money, knowing we're going to live longer and need that money to stretch longer.
Interesting. Does your course help close that gap, the information gap and the taking action? And what does the course specifically address?
All of the stuff we've spoken about so far, and then not just that, other topics as well, but it also gets into solutions. So how do we address longevity? How do we address pay inequality? How do we address some of the guilt that comes with freeing up your time? So that's more or less what the course is about.
Beautiful. And is it delivered virtually or is it a live course? How do you run that?
It depends on the firm. We do it for bar associations, but most of the time firms that have a women's initiative are going to bring us in, and depending on the dynamic, sometimes they'll have us come in and do it live. Sometimes if they have offices across the country and they just want to make sure that all the women get to participate, they'll do it virtually. And I say women, sometimes we do have men that come on these seminars. And personally, I think it's more important for the men to come on, because sometimes like you're nodding your head like, oh, preaching to the choir, of course. And it's usually the men attendees that walk away learning so much more than they thought they would.
That's great. I think all of us are on our own money journey, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I certainly am. I do a lot of my own money mindset work. I switched financial advisors recently. I'm going through divorce. So like it's had me extra. I've had, right, which is another life change that many women go through that needs attention. What would you want every woman attorney or just anyone listening to this podcast to know about themselves and their money?
Your financial journey, as you pointed out, is going to be unique. Just because it made sense for somebody else does not mean it makes sense for you. And it doesn't mean it was bad advice. It could be really solid advice, just not applicable to you. Best to make sure that you're coming up with something that you know is tailored to your specific circumstances, and that's not often the case. And the example I'll give is you have a fresh new associate that's starting off their career, and they're fortunate enough to have a mentor at the office who's a little bit more senior, and they're pushing them to put the money into their 401k because you have no idea when you start young, this is going to be the impact that you have on your long-term retirement. Well, guess what? Their student loan interest is so high that they're just not going to make up for it. Or they should be putting money into the Roth 401k instead of the pre-tax because they're in a lower tax bracket than the person giving them the advice. Doesn't mean it was bad advice, but you have to take your unique circumstances into account.
Wait, I thought you said they couldn't use a Roth. Did you say that before?
IRA, but the Roth 401k, which is available through the firm, they qualify for.
Okay, see, there are all these nuances. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know, but Niraj knows. If someone wanted to work with you, what's the process?
Easiest way would be go to sidebaradvisors.com, and there'll be a schedule a consultation button right there. People could just kind of start there, and we'll set up some time to kind of learn a little bit more about what you're looking for, and you'll get an opportunity to learn a little bit about us, our process, what we cover, that sort of thing.
Great. And so one of the things I heard, and I want to underscore and take away, is there's so much about this, about finances and financial planning, that most of us don't know. And when you're busy in your life and your career and you're focused on those things, it's super easy to not maximize your money because we don't know what we don't know. I also heard that there's an assumption that I can't make a change, but maybe you could. And I think that underneath all of that is the values and what the vision you want for your life is, that you really also help people get some clarity and ground into. Is that true?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the second part of your question. Sometimes it's going back to the expense example. People think that they can't afford to leave because the family's depending on their income. And the reality is sometimes people could afford to live off of one salary and it's not theirs. They just didn't take inventory of where their money's going. We're naturally trained to think we're spending too much, and that's relative. Are you spending too much compared to your income? Most of the time, the answer is no. Just taking inventory of where your money's actually going and how much you actually need. That's oftentimes a huge relief to give people the confidence to make a change. And I think that's a good place to start. But the second you brought it up about how sometimes people just don't have time to think about things and they're oftentimes missing out. Well, let's assume you become a partner at a firm. Oftentimes you have access to different retirement plans that other folks do not. Maybe you have access to a deferred compensation program, which literally allows you to save tens of thousands of dollars in taxes per year, but you didn't enroll because you didn't understand it. And we see that all the time. It's really, like I said, just even if you don't have the time, I mean, that's what makes attorneys such great clients for us. They understand that their situation's more complex. They understand that they're too busy to do the research themselves. And they understand paying somebody for their time and advice. And that's, I think, part of the reason that a lot of the folks that we're working with are happy to retain us, because we're filtering all the stuff that doesn't apply and just focusing on the stuff that's relevant given their circumstances.
It's so good. I switched my financial advisor from this, no offense, older white dude who I always felt was somewhat paternalistic to me. And anytime I wanted to take some money, it happens. And now I work with my financial planners. She does human design. And so she's also like my financial coach and my financial planners. Like, I just want to encourage people, if what Niraj is saying is of appeal to you, to have a conversation. I mean, he's a lovely human. Have a conversation with him or someone on his team. I just think for me, the takeaway is like, I didn't need to stay in that old paradigm of working with some old white dude. And that for me was liberating. And I just think there's a lot of shoulds around money, and taking the time to get some support from a person who feels like a right fit is, to me, that was very liberating.
And I'm glad that you had that experience, because the reality is the industry has shifted. It used to be, and a lot of people still think, that financial planning is all about the portfolio. And the reality is that the portfolio, most advisors aren't going to beat the overall markets. So when you hire somebody to manage your money, the expectation shouldn't be that they're going to outperform the markets. The expectation should be that they're doing this for me because I don't have time. What's really shifting, though, is all the other stuff that falls under the financial planning umbrella. It didn't include tax planning. It didn't include budget strategies. It didn't include estate planning and all the other things that are in your finances that are not your portfolio. That's, I think, what people don't realize is out there and oftentimes missing from their overall lives.
And so you do that kind of wraparound services like that. It sounds like insurance and tax guidance and things like that.
Most of our conversations, not spending a whole lot of time talking about Sharpe ratios and
whatever that means.
People don't care. A lot of times it's for the advisor to sound and feel smart, but the reality is it's not something that the client cares about. So
they just want to know, is my money doing okay and growing? And you're like, hey, let's look more broadly. It sounds like most people have a very narrow guidance or have a narrow perspective of what a financial advisor could do for them. Let people know how they can find you.
Either look me up on LinkedIn or sidebaradvisors.com. We regularly post content that I think is relevant for attorneys, whether it is hearing other attorneys' journeys or how they made the decision to leave and why they made the decision to leave, or how they excelled in their big law career because it was the right fit and the perfect fit. We've been fortunate where we've gotten to interview some pretty powerful guests, some pretty unique stories. It's been great. We'll also post information about financial planning strategies that we see our attorney clients encounter from time to time. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn or the Sidebar page on LinkedIn as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Niraj, because in the past, I've brought in resources like that's more like financial coaching with Ro Thomas and Jessica Medina, but this is some of my clients really need this financial planning. So I'm really happy to meet you and to be collaborating with you. And I look forward to sharing this episode. And if this resonates for you, please reach out to Niraj and his team. And I like to say, where there's a will, there's a way. And let's get you on your way. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Will Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please follow for more, rate and review to help another unhappy lawyer find her way here and see there's nothing wrong with her. You can also please share it with a friend. To learn more about how Will can guide you to clarity, freedom, and relief, go to www.womeninterestedinleavinglaw.com and book your confidential consultation. Where there's a will, there's a way. Let's get you on your way today.